Welcome in. It is Big Ten today on a Friday. We are presented by Gatorade. Dave Revs and Andy Katz with you. Are we done worrying about Michigan State?
We are. Regardless of what happens even Sunday against Northwestern, which we'll talk about later, I think Michigan State is over the hump. They've cured their ills. They know what works for them. And there is a reason that we all thought they could be a top 5 team.
I agree with you emphatically on all counts. That was really impressive last night. That is our big story. MSU absolutely pounding Penn State in East Lansing, a 31-point win, a game in which they never trailed. Spartans shot 56% from the field. They held the Nittany Lions to 32%. Penn State was 3 of 29 from 3. It was the Spartans' largest margin of victory in a Big Ten game in 8 years. Let's break this one down a little bit. I mean, Michigan State came into this game at 0-2 in the Big Ten because they had the losses to Nebraska and Wisconsin, and yet we had a sense they were playing better. I mean, the first half against Baylor, which came after those 2 games, was about as well as a team can play. I mean, they were just fabulous in that one. I would say the first half against Penn State, you have to consider the competition, and Baylor is a better team than Penn State this year. But it was close to that good. I mean, they played a nearly flawless first half.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack here with the Spartans. Let's first deal with the fact that those December games, we've talked about this many times on this show, sometimes people forget about them, but they matter. And this Penn State game as the first game in the restart, think about Michigan State at 0-3 if they drop this game, or if this game potentially had been on the road, they would be in a deep, deep hole. So the 0-2 was on the shelf, and it was another example of Michigan State sort of back against the wall. I felt like that against Baylor, felt it against Penn State. We got to come out here. We're 0-2 in the Big Ten. We need this win to restart us now in this new part of the season. Even though we've been playing well, even though we won 4 in a row, we are 0-2 in the standings, at the bottom of the standings. We're not a bottom team. So right off the bat, I thought they answered that within the Big Ten. 2, the Big 4 are now playing at an elite level. It wasn't that long ago, we talked about this on Thursday, that Tom Izzo was extremely upset with his veterans and threatening, look, if you don't play well, I've got freshmen here, they're going to replace you. And Malik Hall has been consistently good. He was really good against Penn State. Tyson Walker, I don't think was ever in trouble of that, but he's been consistent. A.J. Hogard, a little bit polarizing, obviously, up there, but at the same time, he's been playing at a high level. Jaden Akins, not at an elite level, but still being rather consistent. And then someone had to be off the bench, and this time it was Trey Holloman. And Trey Holloman played at a high level. He delivered for Michigan State. And we said this Thursday, their bigs are their bigs. They're never going to get tremendous stats, if you will, offensively.
Sissoko was great on the board.
No, I know. I'm saying in terms of productivity.
Right.
It's all those other things.
Yes.
Know who you are. Rebound at both ends. Alter and block shots. Set screens, don't get in foul trouble. If you get fouled, make free throws. That's who you are as bigs. We're not going to pound it in inside. And in the Big Ten, and I don't know if you agree with me, Dave, outside of Zach Edey, put Purdue on the other side, what other bigs in the Big Ten are intimidating, or players that you can't match up with if you have some sort of rotational serviceable bigs like Michigan State? I don't think there isn't anyone, outside of Edey and Purdue.
Right. Yeah, it's a different league than it was 3 years ago.
Hunter's gone.
It's a more of a guard-centric
Kofi's gone.
league. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of just, everyone's got sort of guys that sort of fill the void in that position. I mean, Coleman Hawkins is not a true big. He's not going to stay on the low.
He'll provide some matchup problems, and we'll talk about that.
Right, but he's not going to anchor in the low
I hear
block.
what you're saying. There's other than Zach Edey, you mentioned 2 of them right off the bat there. There isn't a Hunter Dickinson or a Kofi Coburn. And I think the thing that was unique about this conference, or unusual about this conference the last 4 or 5 years, is that it was a center-centric conference, and that's not the norm in college basketball, as you well know. College basketball is a guards game and a wings game.
Well, think back a few years ago under the Turgeon era. Maryland had a couple of those bigs back-to-back that got drafted.
Right.
Garza at Iowa. Ohio State has had bigs in the traditional sense.
Right.
All those guys, Indiana, I mean, even Trace Jackson Davis, who could play inside and out, but still, he was very effective inside. He's out of the way. So it really is sort of Purdue's over here. Everyone else has bigs that are going to maybe get you 8 points, but got to rebound at both ends, block shots and alter. And it's all sort of, the positions of 1 through 4 is really what the Big Ten is right now, not true fives at all.
One of the things that really stood out to me about Michigan State last night, where they looked like a vintage Tom Izzo team, was we always talk about Michigan State off of the opponent's makes. And granted, there weren't a ton of opponent makes last night. I mean, they defended so well against Penn State. But they had a number of those where they got it out of the basket, and they got a basket on the other end, in several cases, three-pointers within 5-6 seconds. I mean, it's remarkable how quickly they go after an opponent's make. That was a hallmark of Izzo's teams for years. We hadn't seen as much of it here recently, but this, to me, I mean, it just looked like a Michigan State team last night. And again, I thought they did against Baylor. I thought they did against Indiana State. I mean, I think they've gotten a lot better here in the last month or so. But you look at that team, and to your point, you understand why they were in the top 5 in the nation in the preseason.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Evan Turner and I were talking about this last night, that the Trey Holloman actually kind of looked a little like Cassius Winston.
Oh, with the headband.
Yeah, I mean, just even the way he handles himself on the court.
Right.
The stop-start, and he had that one play on the wing where, one time he sort of fed a trailer. I'm drawing a blank on who was hitting the shot. It might have been Hall. And then another time, he sort of hits the three in the side. He was making things happen. I mean, obviously, with the horrible incident with Jeremy Fears, and now he's out for the season recovering from that gunshot wound. They needed one of those other guards, and it was going to be Fears maybe or Holloman, and now Holloman has stepped up. We'll see. Talking about the bigs, we'll see if over the next couple of weeks Xavier Booker can take that next step, because obviously there's a ton of talent there that could help back up Sissoko. Or whether it's Kohler, whoever else the other bigs are that end up being in that rotation. There are minutes to be had. There's productivity that certainly is available.
Really good on the defensive end as well. 24 points off turnovers. I mean, really, again, both ends of the court, they played fabulously. I want to touch on Penn State really quickly. There's going to be growing pains first year. Mike Rhodes, I think they just ran into a buzzsaw. I mean, they've already had some real positives in this year, most notably the win over Ohio State, the huge come-from-behind victory against what appears to be a top 5 team, I'd say, in the league, in the Buckeyes. But I just think they won the bad timing award last night. I don't really know what else to say.
No question. Kanye Cleary's obviously been very good for them and consistent. He was again against Michigan State. It's a little disappointing that Ace Baldwin hasn't been as consistent. They've expected a lot out of him coming over from VCU and following Mike Rhodes. Maybe there's a little of adjustment from the A-10 to the Big Ten, but clearly he needs to be the player he was, and he was the best player in the A-10 a year ago. He needs to do that for Penn State to be more consistent. I think they will win games like they did against Ohio State at home, where it's going to be tough to sort of put them away. But the reality is, they're not going to be an NCAA tournament team unless they win the tournament, the Big Ten tournament. And so now it's, can they be a postseason team in some form or fashion and build momentum going forward?
Big game Sunday at the Pleasure. They will take on Michigan again,
which we will mention later in the show.
Network. Yes, we will. How about those Gophers? Speaking of Michigan, they went into Ann Arbor and beat Michigan. They are 11-3. They're 2-1 in the conference. They have exceeded last year's win total overall, and they have equaled their conference win total. They won 2 conference games a year ago. They've won 3 games in this year. And aside from all that, I think they're pretty darn good. I mean, they are physical. They're tough. They have a variety of different guys who can score. They have a very good point guard in Elijah Hawkins. He's leading the nation in assists. It's a good team here for Ben Johnson.
Yeah, I think we're certainly looking up and saying, wait a minute. They are a team that could be in the postseason. What postseason tournament? TBD. But you're exactly right. Ben Johnson preached patience. We should have been more patient, and it's proving to be very prophetic on his part. They built confidence. I talked to him yesterday about this, that once they got confident. And I also think, we mentioned this on Thursday, the Missouri loss a year ago, that would have been disastrous for them, because they had that game at home against another Power 5 opponent. You let it slip away. That didn't become a second, a third, fourth loss for them. They turned around, they beat Nebraska within a week or two. Now 2-1 in the Big Ten. Michigan State 1-2, by the way, even though obviously Michigan State I think is better, but still, look at where they are at 2-1. It's going to be very difficult to go into the barn this season and get a W for anybody. They've got, more than serviceable bigs. I mean, Payne's playing well.
Pharrell Payne is a force.
He's going to be a difficult matchup for the rest of the league. I feel like Dawson Garcia, now that he's healthy, he looks more comfortable.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like the weight of the world is on him, and he's just playing freely. And I love watching Hawkins. He's distributing, making things happen. That was a quality road win for Minnesota because Michigan came all the way back, and they were right there, took the lead. It was back and forth, and Minnesota was composed, poised, and extended it right at the end to get the W.
Hawkins had a couple of assists down the stretch that were just fabulous. One to Payne as he was in the lane, and Payne came from the wing and threw down a dunk that was just great vision on Hawkins' part. He's been a huge addition. The issue for them in the last couple of years has been the guard play just hasn't been there. It hasn't been at the level that you need to be to compete in this league. It feels like they made a big jump there. And you mentioned Dawson Garcia, less of the weight of the world on his shoulders, just because they have other scoring options, right? I know last year was basically him and Jamison Battle, and if those two didn't score, they were going to have a really long night. They had 5 players in double figures yesterday. There's really good balance there. It is a fun team to watch, and I know Gophers fans are going to be enthused about it. On the other hand, Michigan, this is just the common theme here, Andy. They cannot close out games.
No, and look, they've had so many chances. Oregon on the road, Florida down in Charlotte, what happened down in Atlantis, multiple opportunities. They've had basically 2 good games. At St. John's, and then their game at Iowa, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yes, they beat Iowa at Iowa.
So those were the 2 that stand out for them. They've not been able to match that. It was one random game and then another one, in the non-conference. And non-conference, conference, and they've not been able to be consistently good night in and night out. Now teams can go into Ann Arbor and win. Think about that. Indiana has done it, and now Minnesota.
Right. Last 2 years, 5 and 16 in games decided by 5 points or less or in overtime. Those are the games that make the difference between, last year it made the difference between being a tournament team and not being a tournament team. And this year, they're a long way from that. They have their worst record now through 14 games in 16 years. So it has been a struggle here out of the gate for Michigan. Jay Lehman is here and ready to talk about this matchup. Man, I'm fired up for this game, fired up to get down to Houston. Before we look ahead, though, I want to look back a little bit because I do think it's instructive to look at what Michigan did against Alabama to get a sense for what they might do against Washington. Let's talk about the defense first, and the defense was just fabulous against the Tide. This is a bigger challenge against Washington for sure, but was there a unit that stood out to you the most defensively in that game against Bama?
I think it's the defensive line. Watching on TV where I watched it from, you got to see it in person, which I think you get to see trench play when you're on the field in person is a lot easier to see who dominates, but it was really easy to see with Michigan, the first series of the game, they had 2 sacks, and that carried on throughout the whole game. 6 sacks total, 10 tackles for loss, all across the board. Whether it's Braden McGregor had 2 sacks. We saw Mason Graham have that huge play in overtime. Chris Jenkins, always solid. We even saw some of the linebackers and defensive backs get in on the pass rush. But Alabama's a team that gave up over 40 sacks. They struggled from an offensive line perspective. Washington, on the other hand, has been a team that has been great at protection. 11 sacks all year. Texas unable to get to Michael Penix. Michael Penix also elusive in the pocket to throw the football. And so you look at this, and it's really going to come down, I think, and you'll look at the Alabama game, totally different in that the strength of this Washington team is their offensive line and quarterback. That wasn't the strength of the Alabama team.
This is an offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award given to the best offensive line in the country. Remember, Michigan had won that the 2 previous years, and we know how good their line was. So I do think there's kind of this misconception out there that Washington's some finesse team. No, they have a really good offensive line. They also have an 1,100-yard rusher, and we'll talk a little bit about Dylan Johnson later and how his injury might impact this game. But before we leave the Michigan-Bama game, what did you make of the back seven? You talked about the line. How about the linebackers?
Well, Junior Colston playing banged up with an injured hand, still very productive, led this team with 10 tackles. I thought Michael Barrett was phenomenal. He did a lot of different things. He lined up on the tight end, kind of took the tight end out of the football game. I saw him rush the passer, create a sack as well. So as far as the linebackers, I was impressed by their play. Really, what was kind of scary is that Jalen Milroe was really never able to test the defensive backs with deep balls. Didn't have the time or didn't have the skill to get open. Rod Moore got tested one time, Mike Sanders still, Wallace sometimes. Johnson wasn't tested that much at all. So totally different game. They're going to be tested a lot more with the deep ball this week.
No doubt. I mean, this is a different animal with Washington. And again, that's no disrespect to Alabama. Alabama was a team that got there primarily because of its defense. Washington is a team that has gotten there primarily because of its offense. So let's get into this Washington offense, and it obviously begins with Michael Penix. And just to put his greatness into context, 4,500 passing yards, consecutive seasons, that has not been done in college football since Patrick Mahomes did it at Texas Tech. He's turned out pretty well. He's a pretty good player. So it gives you a sense of how prolific Penix has been. But what are they up against here? Like for those, I mean, obviously everyone who follows Big Ten football has at least seen him playing at Indiana, and he was really good at Indiana. But give them a sense, if they haven't watched Washington, of what he has done there to elevate his game.
Well, first off, I remember back when Michael Penix was at Indiana, sitting down, battling for the job with Peyton Ramsey. And Tom Allen said in the pre-coaches meet and the coaches meet on Friday, hey, Michael Penix has the most live arm we've ever had here at Indiana under my tenure. So, well, that's a pretty strong statement. That Richard Lego had an arm, and there were some different guys that had some arm over time. But I've seen that, and I've seen that progress under Kalen DeBoer's mentorship at Indiana and now at Washington. When you look at Washington, what they're going to do is they are going to try to get huge chunk plays. They're one of the tops in the country at big chunk plays. They're going to do it with running the ball first with Dylan Johnson, but also max protection. I mean, they're going to keep a back in there. They're going to keep a tight in there. They'll have 7 to protect. They'll throw Rome Odunze down the field. They'll throw Jalen Polk down the field. And you've got to protect for 3-4 seconds, which means you've got to cover for 3 or 4 seconds on the back end. And these guys, this Jalen Polk, Rome Odunze, some of these other guys, they're not just 50-50 balls. They turn that 50-50 into 80-20. They come down with a lot of jump balls. I saw that against Texas as well. They're winning those one-on-one jump ball situations. And when they get a chunk play, they tend to strike right after that. They'll come right after. They don't ever slow down.
The craziest stat to me coming out of that Texas game, and something that gives you a sense of how accurate Penix is and how dependable his receivers are, they're wide receivers, and that includes Jalen McMillan and Jeremy Bernard as well. Those guys were targeted 20 times in that game. They came up with 19 catches.
It's pretty good.
I mean, it's staggering, right?
Yeah.
And their tight end's really good, too. I mean, this is a dynamic passing attack. How do you think Michigan matches up? I mean, we've seen the secondary this year. They're third in the nation in pass efficiency defense. You've got the best passing offense in the country in terms of yards per game against the third best passing defense in terms of efficiency. How do you think these Michigan defensive backs, I mean, Will Johnson, Mike Sainristil, these are big-time players.
Great players, right? I think Will Johnson probably, in my opinion, the most well-rounded corner in all the Big Ten Conference, right? So I think you're going to see him matched up on Odunze or Polk, whoever they think is the biggest threat. Maybe McMillan in this game. Whoever it is, I think you're going to see Johnson match. I think Sainristil has been great in pass coverage. He's also been great in run support. So despite him missing a tackle against Alabama, I think he's been a key as far as run support, but also playing defense. But Rod Moore came up with a big play against Ohio State. So we've seen them play well, but they've always had the advantage that the quarterbacks haven't had much time. No game have they had a bunch of time. If they have a lot of time and they have to cover for 3 or 4 seconds in man coverage, that's hard for anybody. I don't care if you're Michigan. I don't care if you're an All-American cornerback. It's hard to cover. And so they've got to get pressure. And I think, too, and this is where Johnson, the injury to the running back kind of comes in, too, is can they make Washington one-dimensional? If Washington can't run the football and Michigan knows they're going to throw, I think you're going to see 6, 7 man pressures, right, to get that ball out quick, not allow those deep threats to take place. If Johnson is healthy and they can run and throw, it could be a long night.
Right, and so the line that has come out of Washington from Kalen DeBoer is we expect him to play.
Sure.
In terms of Dylan Johnson. He, for those who weren't watching, he re-injured his ankle against Texas the very last play, which in a weird sort of way nearly cost him the game, their very last offensive play. But he has been kind of hurt all year here.
Right.
He's an 1,100-yard rusher. There's really no one else. Now, maybe part of that is just how good he's been. Sure. They don't have anyone else who's rushed for more than 200 yards. So,
not much depth.
No, they really need Dylan Johnson. And again, it speaks to this is a team that can run the ball. Their lead is to pass, as we know. I mean, that's kind of where their bread is buttered. But they are an excellent offensive line, as you've outlined, and he is a big-time back. So this is a very important situation here as to whether or not he's 100%.
Well, what kept Alabama in the game was Jalen Milroe's ability to run the football.
Right.
That was the only thing that really kept him into the game. I would say this, though. If they can't run the football, and Michael Penix, although athletic, does not look to run that much. He looks to throw and scramble.
He looks to extend the play to throw.
First, but doesn't necessarily run the football that much. And so I think that could be a huge issue. Another factor that we haven't mentioned is special teams. I think that has to be something that Michigan has got to focus on, right? They almost gave the game away, not once, not twice, 3 times on special teams between muff punts early in the game, late in the game, and of course the bad snaps that led eventually to an overtime because it was tied. Now, who said it wouldn't be tied anyway? But I would just say they've got to be better on that part because offensive and defensively, they were very sharp.
Special teams was very disconcerting, no question. I mean, it hasn't been anywhere near that all year.
Right.
And so I guess there's just a part of me that feels like somehow the nerves associated with the game showed up there. I mean, I think guys like Samaje Morgan made a really bad decision to try to field that
make a
punt
play
on the run.
He's trying to make a play. It's the first quarter of the Rose Bowl game, semifinal. You make that play. Thaw's back there, and
let it go.
Just your feet or your heels are on the 4.5.
Yeah, exactly.
Let it go. I do give him a ton of credit. He's able to get the. I mean, that's the game right there.
Amazing that he held on to the ball.
If he doesn't get back on that ball, I mean, that's some of those unsung plays that you're like. Now, conversely, I could say, man, Alabama can't snap the football. Alabama can't catch the football. I mean, they shot themselves in the foot a lot, uncharacteristically of a Nick Saban team.
No doubt. Alabama did not play very well.
No.
In that game. Now, again, you can make an argument. Certainly special teams, Michigan played terribly.
Right.
They played great on defense, and they played well enough, and they averaged more than 6 yards a play on offense. And we'll get into their offense here a little bit later in the show. But I think you're going to have to play better than that to beat Washington, but we know that Michigan is capable of playing better than that. I think that's the encouraging thing. If you win a game against Alabama and you don't play your best game, it means you're going to be focused coming into this one because hey, we can improve, and the sky's the limit. I mean, the possibility of bringing home a national championship, if that isn't incentive enough, I don't know what is.
This is Brady Smith inside. Edie cleaning the glass and throwing it down. That is big boy basketball right there.
Well, I think we're stating the obvious. He's very big.
Looks inside for Edie. Poked away by Freeman. He gathers, count it, and the foul. He's too big, he's too strong, and he'll go to the line to add to the 2.
He's 7'4", 300 pounds. He just bulldozes his way in the paint, finishes well at the rim. His length and his strength, 2 things, you combine those things and it's almost unguardable. He's a double-double no matter what you do. But, where you get in trouble playing Purdue and a Zach Edey team is he has the ability to elevate his teammates. So it's pick the poison with that.
Everyone certainly knows what they're up against with Zach Edey. Illinois' turn tonight. Our big stat is brought to you by Gatorade. It shows you just how dominant Edey has been this year. In the top 8 nationally in every category you see here. Leads the nation in dunks and paint points. He's 5th in the nation in scoring, 8th in rebounding, National Player of the Year last year, trending in that direction again this year. And he is Illinois' problem to deal with tonight. You heard the Illini talking about it. Illinois presents some problems as well. They are really good. These last 2 games, even without Terrence Shannon, who is suspended for an off-the-court issue, a legal issue, you still look at this team, and they've won 2 straight games by 30 points, including absolutely annihilating the Northwestern team that beat Purdue in Evanston. So what are you watching here tonight as these two go head-to-head?
All right, so let's first deal with Purdue. I have said this before. I will say it throughout the next 8 weeks. Purdue is Virginia. Purdue is Virginia of 2018, 2019. The core of Purdue is back. They're on a mission. Zach Edey returned. They are better than last year. Very similar. 16 loses to a 1. They win the national championship. They are the best team in the country. They are targeting to get there. They got to get through this minefield of the Big Ten. But Zach Edey is as dominant a player as we've seen in quite some time. He is, I think it's just going to happen that he's going to be on an extremely tiny list of players in the history of this game that have won multiple Player of the Year awards back to back. It's literally, you can put it on one hand, and it's some of the greatest centers of the game, both in the college and in the NBA. Also with them, Braden Smith. He's been an elite all Big Ten guard. The other players, whether it's Fletcher Loyer or Lance Jones, they've done what they needed to do. Trey Kaufman-Renn, when he needs to, has stepped up. But I also love that their bench, every one of those guys knows who they are, whether it's Caleb Furst, Cameron Heide, Mason Gillis, Ethan Morton, Miles Colvin. That's a 5. They all get a minute or 2 or a little bit more, and they all know what they're going to do when they go in the game. Unselfish group. Love them. I love what they're doing, and I thought their Maryland road win was another example of how this is a different team. On the road, a place they lost to last year, and I know Maryland's not as good, but they came in with a mission and beat them. Now for Illinois. Illinois, obviously, they had good players. We know it wasn't just Terrence Shannon. We know that. But Marcus Domask had to do what he did against FAU, and he did against Northwestern. He was phenomenal. Justin Harmon off the bench, 20 points. Utah Valley.
Been great the last 2 games.
Yeah,
Both
so
games
here's a
without
veteran guy coming off the bench. That was huge for them. So what do they do in this instance? Well, Ty Rodgers is going to have to play well. I mean, he's essentially the de facto point guard now for them, and he's going to have to compete. I think a key guy is like Quincy Guerriere, another experienced guy who's bounced around college basketball. He can handle this kind of situation. Can he stay out of foul trouble? Can he find the nooks and crannies in there and the angles? And then 2 guys off the bench. Dane Danger. This is a game for Dane Danger because it's not going to be as up and down. He's going to have to be productive. And then a guy that maybe not as tall, but there's a lot of hype about him, Imani Hansberry. You know, Brad Underwood's been very high on him. This could be a game where he gets some significant minutes to offset, as we saw even though Northwestern won. Zach Edey essentially fouled out almost every single bit.
They had 15 fouls to give with their big guys, and they gave 14 of them.
Yes.
Yeah. And 1 man left standing with 1 foul. No doubt. I mean, that's what Zach Edey does. He draws a ton of fouls. He draws a ton of attention. I do think there's an argument to be made. Coleman Hawkins presents him with some matchup issues. Now, Edey is in fabulous condition. I mean, this is one of the things that's really stood out here about him is he can play 35 minutes a game and he gets up and down the court. He is in great shape. But Coleman Hawkins is one of those stretch 5s, and he can pull you away from the basket. So you do wonder whether Illinois tries to lean on that a little bit just to wear Edey out a little bit and put him in situations where he's chasing.
Yeah, I think when he plays the 5, Coleman Hawkins, then it's a problem for Zach Edey because he would have to be pulled out. Or does Matt Painter obviously switch and have, whether it's Trey Kaufman-Renn or whoever else is out, Caleb Furst, whoever's out with him, go out to guard Hawkins and leave Edey in the post. We'll see how he plays it. Obviously, highly successful, won a ton of games, so he'll do the right thing in that regard. But Hawkins also has been a bit of an enigma at times.
Yes.
You know, he literally can disappear. Now, he was hurt at times this earlier this season.
Not literally.
Yes, not literally. Thank you. That would be impressive.
That
if
would
he could
really
literally
be something, yeah.
just disappear. And that'd be a problem for Illinois. If it
Really,
was 4
well,
on
but
5,
if then you could have him, if he disappears, then he could reappear right under the basket wide open. That would really be something.
Man.
Anyway, I've taken us way off the rails, and I apologize to everyone watching.
Figuratively, you forget he's on the court because he does disappear.
Yes.
And he can't afford to do that.
Right.
He needs to make some of those shots, especially those threes that can really stretch the game. He's got to stay out of foul trouble because if he's on the bench for long stretches, that's a big problem for Illinois.
First top 10 showdown at Mackey Arena in 14 years. Did not realize that. That was in the Chris Foreman's brilliant game notes that he puts out, which are tremendous.
And think about the history here. Used to have Katy and Ensign.
No, this is a great rivalry. And other than Michigan and Michigan State, these are the two schools that are closest to one another in the Big Ten. So, no, it's going to be great. Really excited about it. That one's tonight. Here's the slate for tomorrow in the Big Ten. We have 2 games on our air, Rutgers and Iowa and Nebraska and Wisconsin. I hear there are rumors circulating that you are going to Madison.
Yes, why not?
Well, I can't answer that question. Then in primetime, Ohio State in Bloomington. They will battle Indiana. That one's over on Fox. Not only are you going to the game, which would in and of itself make the most intriguing game, but I think that on the court, I think this matchup is the most intriguing matchup. Nebraska and Wisconsin, they're both playing really well. This would be, I mean, for Nebraska, this would put them at another level to me, because I think Wisconsin, maybe Michigan State's in that conversation now, but they're one of the 4 best teams in the Big Ten. Wisconsin, I would say, maybe one of the 3 best teams in the Big Ten.
They might be the second best.
They might be, yeah. No, they're solidly in that conversation. Nebraska, I think, is vastly improved. This is a really good game.
And Nebraska's won on the road. That win at K-State, I think, was a game changer for Nebraska. That had been the big problem for this sort of group of Huskers. Pretty good at home.
Yep.
Either upset or be close to upsetting teams in Lincoln, not able to transfer that on the road. And it looked like, okay, we're going down this path again when they lost to Minnesota. But then they go to K-State. One of the hardest places to play, not just in the Big 12, but in the country, Bramlage. And the students are great there. They hold them to under 50 points. So it was a great defensive effort on the road, because that's what has to transfer when you go on the road. The Kohl Center has not been as intimidating. The students aren't back yet. So really the onus will be on the Madison community, usually good, very supportive. But this is a winnable game for Nebraska in Madison. Now, conversely, Wisconsin's playing really well. A.J. Storr, I think we will look back at the end of the season and say he, was one of the best transfers in the portal for filling a void for a team regardless of conference. I don't know how many of us thought that at the time, but certainly it is playing to be true that he has been a total transformation for this team.
When Chucky Hepburn threw the alley-oop off the backboard to him, I just had this image of what Bo Ryan must be thinking right now. We should shoot him a text and find out what his thoughts are. It did not feel like Bo Ryan basketball, but man, A.J. Storr's on a different level. What about Iowa? I never want to say a must-win, but they're in jeopardy of falling to 0-4 in the league here, hosting Rutgers. This feels like one you kind of got to win. I mean, if you're going to be legitimately in the conversation here as an NCAA tourney team.
And this goes back to what we said earlier in the show about these December games. They catch up to you. If you don't play well early in December, now suddenly, first week of January, you're in a deep hole.
And that Michigan game you talked about earlier, like that Michigan game is a game they probably looked at the same way. Hey, we got to figure out a way to get this one, and didn't get it.
So they could go 0-4. Now they're going against a Rutgers team in a week that is much different. A week ago, the Stonehill game, they can't even get to 60 points against a team that's just transitioning from D2 to D1. Now they go over 70 against Ohio State. So even though they lose that game, they're feeling much more confident. Even though it's on the road, this Iowa team is going to have to protect its home court, score the way they did in one of their last non-conference games where they put up 100. If they can do that, that's problems for Rutgers. I mean, even though Rutgers scored in the 70s, I don't think Rutgers can get to the 80s, 90s, 100.
Strength against strength. Rutgers great defensively, as we know, and Iowa fabulous on offense. Indiana, man, they really played poorly against Nebraska. And Mike Woodson pulled no punches talking about his team. And we'll see whether that gets them going. This is a game against Ohio State. Again, trying to defend home court. This is one of those games you look at and say, and again, I understand, they had won a couple of conference games, so you're feeling good on that, kind of in the win-loss percentage part of it. But in terms of do you have impact wins, they really don't, and this is a chance to get one.
And Ohio State's played well on the road, or at least in neutral courts as well, beating West Virginia and Cleveland. They beat UCLA and Atlanta. So they can go on the road and feel fairly confident. I know they blew the game against Penn State, but their backcourt is much better than Indiana.
Yeah.
Now Indiana's front court is better than Ohio State. So can they exploit that? I mean, can where Mbako, who has to play better than he did in the last outing, can Renew stay out of foul trouble? They have the advantage there. Can they exploit it? Ohio State's guards, from the 1, 2, and 3, they held that advantage. If they shoot well in Assembly Hall, they're going to win on the road.
Indiana's got to get better play out of Xavier Johnson. Came back from the injury.
More turnovers.
First game back. Look, first game back's hard, right? I mean, he hasn't played since November.
And on the road.
Yeah, but again, like Mike Woodson did not pull punches.
Nope.
I mean, he said he just wasn't good enough. He's got to be better. Sixth-year player on a group that has a lot of young players who you outlined playing major roles. Got to figure out a way there. Ohio State, by the way, you get a win here. You're 13-2. It'd be the best start under Chris Holtmann. Back to the champ game. It'll be Michigan's 5th game against a ranked foe this year. As you might expect, they found it to be tougher sledding offensively against the better teams on their schedule. Fewer points and yards by a significant margin. Important to note, though, just 1 turnover in the previous 4 games against ranked teams, and they've scored on every red zone trip, 12 for 12, with 7 touchdowns. Jay Lehman back with me, and we talked about defense was Bama's strong suit. Washington's strong suit is its offense. So how does this Michigan offense match up against Washington's D?
Washington's no slouch defensively.
Right.
I certainly don't think they're Alabama-esque or Georgia-esque, but I think it comes down to the ability to run the football for Michigan. If they can run the football, and they haven't been as dynamic running the football as they were in 2021 or 2022 when their offensive line won the Joe Moore Award, they've been good, not great. When they need to run the ball and everybody in the stadium knows they're going to run the football, they've done a good job of doing that in the 4-minute drills, closing out games, in overtime against Alabama, against Ohio State. The fourth quarter, they have a 6-7-minute drive where they just keep running the football. Ohio State can't get them off the field. Penn State, obviously, they run the football the whole time. So I think running the football, not just to, say, hey, we're getting first downs, it's to control the clock and to limit possessions for that Washington offense.
So I'm with you 100% on this. I mean, to me, this is the single most important part of this game, is can Michigan run the ball, A, because when Blake Corum gets going, he's really good, and whether or not Donovan Edwards, I mean, I feel like we're at a point now in the season where it doesn't seem like it's going to happen with Donovan Edwards, but Blake Corum is phenomenal. And then keeping Washington off the field. I mean, you were talking about it, right? Because the big concern is, how do you deal with Michael Penix and the big plays? Well, if you grind out these long drives, it really helps you on 2 fronts here. It wears them down, and it keeps the most dynamic offense, arguably, in the country on the sidelines.
Well, I think Kalen DeBoer, Washington's head coach, offensive mastermind. You got to give him. You look at his career record, all the way back to Sioux Falls and the national championships he's won there, and then what he did in Indiana, what he did at Fresno.
His career record's like 110-14 or something
it's
absurd
insane.
like that.
I mean, I think only Urban Meyer and Ryan Day might have a better career record than them, right? As far as percentage goes. He's a really good football coach, but the way to frustrate a good offensive football coach is don't let him have the football. You keep the ball away, right? They're a team that's going to want 11, 12, 13, 14 possessions in a game. If you could shorten that down to 8, 9, and then you stop them on 3 or 4, well, now they only have 20, 25 points. They're not going to beat Michigan by having 25 points. Washington's got to have a 30, 40-point game and outscore Michigan, because that's how they're built, and that's what Kalen DeBoer wants to do.
What's the part of this Washington defense that concerns you the most?
I think the linebackers. I think they're good enough to stop the run, but also can take away the play action. And the play action is such a big part of J.J. McCarthy's tool set, right? And we saw it a little bit with Colston Loveland against Alabama, kind of quiet for Colston Loveland, but he's an all Big Ten tight end, right? He's a good football player. They're going to try to get him the football more, and they're going to try to get Roman Wilson going earlier. He wasn't going to the fourth quarter, and then when he went, he went. I mean, he went the elevator for that big play, right? I mean, that was big time. Yeah. So I think they get those guys going early, but the linebackers are going to be key for Washington, because I believe they have the ability to stop the run and stop the play action. And if they can do that, that takes 2 huge pieces out of Michigan's offense. But that's easier said than done.
Feels like a really competitive game, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, it feels like this is going to be a really, really good game. And the semifinals certainly delivered. Will the final deliver as well? We will find out.
We will. And let's not forget J.J. McCarthy. He's been clutch.
Yes.
And I don't think you can put a quantifiable thing on that, but when he's needed to make a play with his legs or his arm, he's made the play.
And I think the one thing that was really positive was he didn't run it a ton in that game against Alabama, but when he needed to, he looked good. He looked like the J.J. McCarthy
Healthy.
we had come to expect. Healthy, yes.
Yeah.
And,
And there was rumors that he wasn't healthy last 2 or 3 games.
Yeah, and he said it. I mean, he said that he wasn't healthy. So, yeah, no doubt. All right, great stuff, Jay. Thanks a lot, man.